Hi everyone, it's Victoria here, and welcome to the podcast. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know about the free courses the Victoria Stilwell Academy has available to enroll in right now for dog geeks like you. Just go to vsdogtrainingacademy.com and click the enroll button, and you'll see the free course options. That's vsdogtrainingacademy.com. See you there. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I have wanted to speak to my next guest for probably a few years now. And I have finally got her here, and I am so happy to talk to this incredible woman. She is an engineer. She was an engineer and turned canine behavior consultant. She is a canine myotherapist. She is based in Bangalore, India, the director of BHARCS, which is an academy that educates pet parents and professionals on canine behavior and ethology. She is the author of the wonderful book, Dog Knows. Part of that book is decoding the rich social and emotional lives of dogs. She's also well known, apart from imparting such amazing wisdom, for her study of street dogs in urban India. Sindhoor, welcome. We are so glad to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's just such an honor. Thank you so much for having me over. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Okay, well, I would love to know about your journey. Now, you are well known in the pet space, but for those of you who don't know you, and I don't think there's a lot, but for those of you who don't, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Sure. So like you mentioned, I started out doing nothing with dogs. I worked on computers. I worked for a company called Yahoo. You may have heard of it.
Yes.
It was really technology that I was into. And then like a lot of people in the corporate world, some amount of soul searching happened. And I knew I was ready for something other than that. And around that time, fate intervened in a rather cruel way. And my dog met with an accident. Nishi, she was a puppy back then, a boxer puppy, and a car ran over her face and she survived. This miracle little dog of mine survived that. But that then made me realize that I was very committed to helping her through this, in the healing journey that she had to commence on. And I recognized that that's her journey. And I knew that vets could help her physically heal, and I knew very little about dogs, but I knew enough to say that, to recognize that there's going to be an emotional journey here involved, having been through something this traumatic. And how do I support this emotional journey of hers? And that is where all of this started. I started looking for answers. And interestingly, an emotional journey is not exactly supported through training. That's, not the ambit of training. And so it really took me in a completely different direction. Back then, there were very few people talking about these kind of things. But I started looking, and I suppose I must acknowledge my privilege to be able to be able to dedicate that space, that time for me to look. And it led me to a whole new world of animal, I shouldn't say animal behavior, maybe animal internal lives, because it involves kind of their emotions and their physiology and all of that wonderful stuff. And that's when I realized, and I learned so much about it. I was able to help my dog, but I also realized that I had come across something pretty remarkable, and I wanted to share it. I knew I had a moral obligation to share it. And that started my professional journey. I then went on to get an education in, behavior, not behavior modification, but really understanding behavior. So I should, perhaps the better word is maybe some form of ethology. And then myotherapy, which is like physiotherapy, but specifically for dogs. And so understanding the body, the mind, the emotions. And more recently, I just finished my dissertation for my master's in anthrozoology, which is an offering from the anthropology department. I'm doing this at Exeter. And so this department looks at human-animal entanglements through history, religion, geography, media, industry, so on and so forth. And it's really, I think I've kind of hit upon my stride. I've hit my stride, and I've hit upon the treasure trove of knowledge, resources, and vocabulary to express what has been in my heart. And I'm just returning back from having conducted a few workshops in Europe, and I realized that it's not just a vocabulary to express what's in my heart, but it's also a vocabulary to express what has been in many people's heart. Many of us feel this, that there's something kind of missing with the way we are understanding and interacting with animals. There's something more than just, let's get an obedient dog. There's really more there. And so I think, again, I feel like I've stumbled into this gift, and somehow I feel morally obligated to share it. And that's why I'm here.
So you learn, one of the places you went to was quite close to where I am, Asheville, North Carolina, and you learn with Turid Rugas. And part of that is a project that you have to do.
Yes.
And that is where, I don't know whether you start observing street dogs, but your project is to study the urban street dog in India.
Yes. So that's where I decided. So given that I'm an engineer, and when I was in class, I came across these ideas that were really contradictory to what I knew about dogs. So they were brand new ideas, and most of us know the kind of cognitive dissonance that you're going to run into when there's a brand new idea. It didn't sit right with me. But I think I'm blessed in that I have ways to open my mind up and look past the cognitive dissonance, but I do it my own way. And so I said, numbers are my go-to. That's where I find my comfort. So I am going to go look at dog behavior, as in free living dog behavior, and answer these questions for myself. So I don't want to know what somebody else's opinion of a dog is. And I don't want to look at a dog that has been completely shaped by the expectations and the desires and the sort of self-image of people who quote unquote own these dogs and kind of control every aspect of their life. These are all reflections of just people. I want to know what a dog is. A dog brought up by a dog, mentored by a dog who has been, brought up by several generations of dogs. Who do they become? And really, what are the answers there? And specifically, I was looking at that time, I started out by looking at the activity budget of dogs, which is how long do they spend doing different things. And so I came back to India from Asheville, and I started, as many of you may know, we have free living dogs in India. Free living dogs are not stray dogs. They are dogs who are born on the streets, brought up by other dogs. And interestingly, in India, they're protected by the constitution of the country as well. And so I started examining them, which started my research into my studies into dog behavior, dog ethology. But very quickly, I ran into problems over there because I started qualitative studies on them, and me being an engineer, that was really my comfort zone. But I realized that these were incredible animals with these extraordinary stories, and the numbers just couldn't tell those stories. They were just not doing justice. And around the same time, there were also people beginning to get excited about this and asking me about street dogs and asking me to talk about them. And I was taking these numbers and these charts, and I was standing there and looking at these charts and saying, God, but this is not telling the story that I want to tell. This is not painting the picture that I want to paint. And so that is where finally I in my multiple failed attempts later, I signed up for my master's, which introduced me to qualitative research. So today, if you ask me about street dogs, I'm far more passionate about telling you their stories, their lived experiences, their subjective realities. And I invite everybody who listens to me in any platform to take a peek into their world. I'm here trying my best as reflexively as possible to present their reality. And I invite you to kind of jump into that reality for a moment and lose yourself in the world for a moment without preconceived notions, without judgment. Just come in here and enjoy this for a moment, and then you can go back to your reality and analyze this the way you want to. But yeah, that's the invitation.
It's hard for us here in America to be able to, observe street dogs. Mm-hmm. You can do it actually when you go over to somewhere like Greece. You can do it in Mexico, mm-hmm. But it's hard. And so I had never had that opportunity until, funnily enough, I was doing a project and filming over in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And because of the economic downturn, mm-hmm. in Detroit, there are areas where there used to be beautiful houses, mm-hmm. but whole streets, whole communities were wiped out by the economic downturn. So you have these beautiful houses that are now empty. Streets upon streets upon streets of neighborhoods gone. And nature is taking over these houses. So trees are growing through them, plants are going through them, but also taking over these houses is the dog. So these houses, instead of being human houses, are now massive dog houses. And dogs that were presumably left have now taken over these areas and are living very successfully. And it was very interesting to go to somewhere like Detroit. Who would have thought it? A very urban area, and now watch these dogs interacting, not just with people, because some of them were very affiliative, and we were able to have interaction with them. And so we believed that those were the dogs that were either left or pushed out, abandoned in some way. But the offspring of those dogs were in two minds. Are we going to approach these people? Are we not? And so it was the first time that myself and others who came with me had the ability to be able just to sit and watch. And for me, it was this moment of, we're all so busy. We're all just doing things all the time and training. That's the thing. And you've got to get your dog to sit, stay, and come when called. And you have to do this. But actually, when you just take a deep breath and you sit and you observe, my goodness, what can you gain just by watching dogs as free living? Free living. And I love that term, free living. It is much better than stray. It's free living. And in some ways it seemed, well, in many ways, that those dogs didn't need us. They just were. Yeah. Who would have thought that in Detroit you could see this? And I think you still can, because so many of those urban areas have not regenerated. And so dogs have taken over. What I observed as well is that there was one particular dog. It was a black brown dog. It was male. And he was obviously the dog that was making sure it seemed that everybody else was okay. And he was like, he was a little aloof, but also interactive, especially with the younger dogs. And so I thought, and watching him as well, I was like, goodness me, how we're trying our best, but how humans can mess it up when we interfere. And of course, we've domesticated these animals. So I think I'm just excited to share that with you because it was such an unexpected environment for us to observe, but very real. And it gave me a new appreciation.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about some of the things that you have observed in your research just by watching how dogs interact when they're free living?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's quite remarkable and fascinating, actually, because I think it gives us another opportunity to study some very interesting things about free living dogs and what that means, because it seems like it's a very interesting transition that they're going through from having lived a captive life to now having to live a free life and then becoming sort of the quote unquote elders who are now expected to mentor the next generation of dogs. And so I talk a lot about the idea of sort of, I use phrases like this that to make it easier to understand and to picture, but sort of the generational knowledge or the generational wisdom, canine wisdom that that dogs carry. But if I were to talk about it a bit more sort of technically, we know that behavior is not completely it's not completely phylogenic, it's ontogenic, which is, behavior. There's a part of it that is, the genetically coded toolkit, but then there is a huge part of behavior that is learned through, through their lives. And there is also a generational transmission of what they learn. Social beings benefit from not having to figure out everything by themselves, but actually figure it out from what others have learned, figure it out from observation. And also there is definitely a kind of a knowledge transmission that's happening between sort of the older generation to the younger generation. And with dogs, with free living dogs, they are interesting social beings. There's a really lovely lab. The lab is the wrong word, but a study center for free living dogs in Kolkata in India, where there's some fabulous quantitative studies by the scientists over there. And there's a lovely paper there where I like the title of the paper. She says, this is Dr. Badra's paper, and she says, dog social structures are like large joint Indian families. In India, we typically have what are called joint families, and we contrast that with nuclear families. Nuclear families are mom, dad, and the kids, but Indian families tend to be large with many members, many generations living together. Not all, but it is a part of our culture. And she compares it to them. Because that's what you see with these dogs. They do live with their families and extended families, and multiple members of the older generation are involved in caregiving of the younger generation. So there's a lot of what is called alloparental care that's happening there. And when I observe the dogs right outside, I live on a farm. Well, I'm not on a farm today, but I usually live on a farm. And what I observe is the siblings from the previous litter, the uncles, the dads, the grandmothers, the aunts, mother. It's not just the mum. All of these members are involved in providing care, providing education, providing kind of guidance, and role modeling behavior. And the workshop that I conduct, I show a lot of videos, and there's a really lovely video of the older sister playing with the adult male dogs, and there are these two cute puppies who are sitting there and watching it like they're sitting in a school and watching it. It's just adorable to witness this thing. And it strikes me, it strikes me that if I'm going to bring a dog home, where are you going to have the benefit of this rich education? It's just me. It's just me trying to, fit into all these shoes. And the worst part of this is I'm not even a dog.
It's so true. Oh my God.
And here I am, a completely different species. I'm still discovering what it means to be a dog, and I'm trying to mentor you into being a dog. I'm setting you up for failure right away.
It's crazy when you think about it. You just put it
Yes.
perfectly. Crazy.
Right?
And yet we think we know better.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in Spain, that's what I said. I said, this would be a little bit like me telling you guys, hey, I did like 10 hours or 20 hours of Spanish on Duolingo. So now send your kids to me so that I teach them Spanish, right? It's bizarre. And yet I think we have this extraordinary hubris as human beings that somehow we can teach animals to be better versions of themselves, that we know them better than they know themselves. And quite honestly, that seems to be, we recently had a talk, Andy, and we did this on his group on intersectionality, right? Because this kind of hubris about I know better about what's good for you is something that we do to each other too. It is very typically seen, for instance, some sections of society will do it to other sections of society. And it's always based on some kind of a power structure where we decide, because I belong to this section, I am better, I know better, and therefore I can talk down and tell them how to live better. And this is universal. It seems like we do it all. We find different ways to slice and dice subgroups of people, and we do this to each other. And it's no wonder that we do this to animals too. But, you said to me that we are here trying to have this conversation because we want to ask ourselves, how do we do better? And I think one of the first things that I insist with my students is we need humility. We need the humility to say that a dog is an expert of dog. Victoria is the expert of Victoria. Sindhoor is the expert of Sindhoor, right? And a dog is the expert of the dog. So have the humility to say, I'm stepping out before you try to modify and change and whatnot. First, take a beat to understand from them who they are, what they want to be, what they like, what they're trying to say, how do they communicate. And understand it would be ridiculous if I came into the US and didn't take a moment to understand how US societies work and then just insisted that things had to be done my way. Now that would never be possible, but I'm just pointing out the ridiculousness of something like that, right? And so I think that's really the big lesson for me. So the motto at BHARCS is learning to learn from dogs. It's not teaching dogs. We're learning. But we're not just learning about dogs. We want to learn from dogs. And sadly, we don't know how to do that. And so I think that is really the mind shift that I want is to figure out how do we equip ourselves to learn the reality of another.
Now, the training world that I was brought up with was 25 years I've been doing this. But the training world I was brought up with was very much that hierarchical system and top dog. And even though I was never taught to, I was taught to absolutely respect the dog and to not use physical punishment. Other punishments were fine, like noise aversion, things like that. But you never physically put your hand on a dog. You never cause them to fear you, but we were still taught that there is a hierarchy and the dog, if it is misbehaving, is trying to get one up on you, that whole thing. And I always thought it was a bit weird because I always thought, well, how are dogs that like humans? We humans fail in many regards to that, and hierarchy is very important to us. Hierarchy in terms of status, and as a Brit, you're brought up knowing your place in the hierarchy of status, whether you are working class or middle class or middle upper class or aristocracy. You learn from a very young age who you are and what class system you are in. And so in the UK, where there was emphasis, certainly when I was growing up, and I'm in my my 50s now. So when I was growing up, it's like, you don't go above your class. And actually, at the same time, you also don't go below your class. So I was very standard middle class. And my parents had a lot of upper class friends and a couple of aristocracy friends as well. And always I felt like my parents felt subservient to those people in the upper and aristocracy. And so, of course, in turn, I did too, because that's what I learned. But in turn as well, we didn't really mix with anybody from the working class, because that's what you just didn't do that. So when I went to university, I was exposed to all different kinds of people going, that person is really cool. And that person speaks with a northern accent, because I really hadn't been around people that spoke with a northern accent, for goodness sake. So I really, at universities, began to see how kind of sheltered I was. I thought, I had a great upbringing. I had a very cultural upbringing for my class system, but I was really aware. So it seemed to be weird right from the start that dogs were kind of similar. That people were talking about dogs in a similar way. Anyway, but people who knew more than me were telling me that this is how I needed to be. So, sorry, my earphone keeps on coming out. And that's kind of how I continued. And then I had this epiphany, and it was Patricia McConnell, really, that I began to go, oh, everything that I felt weird about, she kind of said, it's okay. It's okay to feel weird about it, because actually I think we're on the wrong track and we need to get on the right track. And so there starts the journey. But we are still in this training. And it's the reason why Andrew and I have spoken so much of like, how can we collectively, as dog behavior experts, move the dial collectively in the way that it needs to go, because we're tipping so far off the precipice now of dogs that have anxieties and so many issues, because we're trying to make them what they are not. We're trying to understand them. We are confining them. Wow, head explosion when I tell people that they are living in a confined environment. No, what do you mean? I walk my dog every day. Yeah, but on your terms. How do we therefore continue that journey? How do we battle the social media out there? How do we get to a point where this just becomes the norm?
Yeah.
That's absolutely a lot, Sindhoor. I just unpacked a lot on you. I'm so sorry. But I think it's important to say how outside influence sort of influences one as a person, and that the people that you learn from might not always be right. And that actually, as you learn and evolve, it becomes simpler in a way.
Yeah. I think so. And it's really been a remarkable journey for me now where I'm at. When I first started, I really was very overwhelmed with, dog training itself is quite overwhelming. It's not just about controlling the dog and getting the dog to behave a certain way, but in it, there is also a form of control being imposed on you. You are worried about how you are going to be seen, how you are going to be judged. So really, and your story about sort of the classism that you lived through and questioned and challenged, it's the same thing, right? In India, we have casteism, and then you have racism, and you have patriarchy, and all these kind of isms all over the place. And we're so used to doing this. And you start questioning it, you start challenging it, and it gets very uncomfortable in the beginning. But when you go past a certain point, and a big part of challenging it is recognizing the box that you have been put in. There is a biopolitics that's happening there, where you, through social conditioning and pressure, have been put in a box, and now you are confined in this box, and now you're trying to get your dog to fit in this box as well. And it's very similar to for instance, how we bring up children, at least in India, there's this extraordinary pressure that a parent feels, I need to be seen this way and I need to be seen like this parent. And so the more you're willing to conform to these rules of society, and you are allowing yourself to be kind of controlled, it makes complete sense then that you think that it's completely morally justified to then transmit that control over to the ones that you are providing care to. And so, so this whole thing, the whole training thing is I think looking at it critically, I think is a great moment of reflexivity for us. It's a moment of reflexivity for society itself, and how we are allowing these social norms to define everything that we do. So I think it's a wonderful moment in time that we have come to, and this, dogs are just the excuse here, right? It's really a bigger social question here, and to ask ourselves that. And I talk about this idea of the philosopher Donna Haraway talks about the idea of the animal mirror. She says you polish the animal mirror to, I forget the exact quote, but I think it's something like you polish the animal mirror to discover yourself in it. And so I think these are questions that you're asking about yourself in, if I need to control the dog and if I need to get the dog to behave this way, what is it telling me about the pressures I am being put under? Why do I feel this need to control the dog? And often the answer is not, it's not malicious. It is a form of helplessness that you are being expected to control your dog and make the dog behave a certain way. And if you look carefully at it, that expectation is on you. You are being expected to, right? So I think that we have a large mandate ahead of us. I agree, but I think the time is right, because here we're all talking about this and asking ourselves. So I think this is great, and asking these questions reflexively, asking it bravely and boldly, and sitting with the discomfort. This is another thing that I'm really encouraging everybody to do. The idea of, get comfortable with discomfort, be okay with the fact, I say this often, these conversations should keep you up at night. It should. And this is our moral obligation, to actually sit with these uncomfortable questions. We may not like what we see about ourselves. We may not like what we see about how much we have been subjugated and how much we continue to pass on that trauma onto other species and other, our partners, our children, name it. But sit with that discomfort, and in sitting in that discomfort, we're going to make so much progress. So it's not really, in the end, it's not really that difficult. It's not about what we do. It's not about being busy and doing something. It's really about slowing down, not doing anything, sitting with that discomfort and saying, I'll just sit with this feeling and let's see where it takes me. And I think it can take us to really magical places. Something cracks inside you, something breaks, and, the hardness breaks, and there's an extraordinary softness that emerges. And it's easy. It's very easy once you do that. But I think that initial barrier is the one that we have to figure out how to cross.
Yeah. And the societal norms, you're exactly right. I mean, put such a pressure on us to do more, to have more, to get more, to be more knowledgeable, so that we can impart our knowledge and that we can educate other people. We can educate our dogs to be better citizens in our world. And there's so much pressure. And I talk a lot about my grandmother who lived in the countryside, and she bred beagles, and she was just a beagle lover. And she was born and brought up in London, but then she moved to the countryside in 1968, and she was able to take her dogs and breed more of these amazing dogs. And she was a hobby breeder, but she was a great breeder. And these dogs just were. They just were. They would go out and do their hunting, and once they were done, they would come back home. And they would go for walks, and they were all off the lead. And sometimes if they caught a scent, they'd go. And then my grandmother would walk home, and she knew that they were going to come home a couple of hours later. They just were. Now, I'm not saying people do that. But she just was. And I was always fascinated about this. And as I kind of went through my training journey, I kind of would look back and think, I used to think she was doing it all wrong, but actually she just was. And in fact, she was doing less. And I studied to be an actor. And one of my teachers would always say, there's a difference between those people who are really good actors and those people who do amateur dramatics. Great for the amateur dramatics, but they can't be the real actors. Why? Because they do too much. And they're not authentic and they are not genuine. And that's the reason why they are doing amateur dramatics, which is great, but they're not going to be professional actors, because the professional actors, they do less. They just are. And so it seems like we just need to do less and we just need to be. And then we're going to have the space in our very crammed heads, we're so chaotic because there's so much to deal with, where we can have that space to breathe and to look beyond. And I want to take a quick break, but after the break, I want to come back and ask you ways of how we can be better. So after we have observed, what do we then do? A quick break here to get a word from this episode's sponsor, the Victoria Stillwell Academy. Now, did you know that I have a school that teaches people to be dog trainers? I love It's Me or the Dog and my work as a dog trainer on television, but those of you who know me know that my true passion really lies with helping other people live their best lives with dogs. And I love seeing that truly magical transformation when that light bulb goes off with someone I'm helping with their dog. That's what it's all about. It's the secret sauce that pet professionals like me, who work with these amazing animals, that's what we all share. It's what makes being a dog trainer the most rewarding, enriching job I can imagine. It's why I love what I do. And it's also why I founded the Victoria Stillwell Academy, so that I could provide a roadmap to others who want to help dogs and the people who love them learn to do what they love doing at the highest level, that is, to become professional dog trainers. Earning a living working with dogs professionally has been a dream of mine for years, and that passion is what drives all of us at VSA to create courses that are specially designed to help adult human learners chase their dreams. Now, most people already know about our flagship dog trainer course, which provides both online only and in-person options. But did you know that we also offer both dog guardians and future professionals a fully refundable 10-hour online course taught by me and other awesome VSA faculty, and it's called the Fundamentals of Dog Training and Behaviour course. Now, I know it's not the sexiest name, but it's one of the most dynamic learning experiences available to dog geeks, and it's a pretty awesome first step to see if learning with VSA is right for you. Now, as a Positively Podcast listener, you can use promo code PODCAST right now to get the Fundamentals course for 50% off. That is $150 value. So, take our course. Plus, we also have a couple of free starter courses. They're free, completely free, including a course called Building Your Dog's Confidence, which reveals the secret ingredient to a happy dog life. So, I encourage you to check out VSA today. As I said, we have courses for all levels of learners. So it doesn't matter whether you're a newbie with your first puppy or a grizzled vet already making a living as a pet professional. Visit positively.com/VSA to learn more and enroll in a free course. That is positively.com/VSA. We all want the best for our dogs, whether that means you taking home some key tips for your own dogs or adding the ultimate in professional dog trainer education. Visit positively.com/VSA today. VSA, it is the future of dog training. And now, back to the podcast. I'm back with Sindhoor Pangal, and oh my gosh, we are having a fascinating conversation. You know what? A 45-minute podcast or a 50-minute podcast is not enough, right? Is not enough because there is so much to talk about. But when we take that breather and that we take the pressure off what we need to do or be as the dog trainer or the good dog owner. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Um, like you said, a podcast is not enough space and time to really answer that. But I think for me, a lot of it starts with observation and recognizing the individual. So it's really letting go of what I think a dog needs to be, what I think a breed needs to be, and what I think, whatever needs to be, and really look at, but who are you? What is it? How do I discover who you are? And that discovery process and that journey is going to be different for everyone. How do I listen to what works for you? How do I meet your needs as defined by you? And quite honestly, once you start meeting the dog's needs and you're able to communicate with the dog, after that, it's really not that difficult. But getting there, and like we said, slowing down in itself is very challenging for us, and getting there has some interesting components. So I always start with first and foremost learning how to read dogs, and that starts with theoretically learning about their communication, but then going and observing. So a lot of just observe. What can I learn about dog social structures, how they resolve conflict, how they teach each other, who should they be learning from, how can I what are the traits of a good dog teacher? And when I say dog teacher, I don't mean a human being trying to teach a dog to be a dog, but a dog being a good mentor for a dog. The dog that you spoke about, the male dog that you spoke about. So what are the traits that go into that kind of a role that a dog can take on? So answer these questions for yourself. Observe these things. These are things that you can easily learn in one lifetime. You don't need it's not rocket science. You sit and observe, and a lot of these things just come to you. Sitting and observing is not easy.
No, it's not.
But no, and that might need some training. But once you do that, these answers start coming to you. And then the next thing that we work on is what kind of a lifestyle do we want to create for a dog that helps them remain emotionally regulated? Because a big part of allowing a dog to be a dog is allowing them to take their own decisions, trusting their judgment. But their judgment is not going to be very good if they're highly emotionally dysregulated, meaning if they're highly anxious or even highly hyperactive. And, a lot of us don't see hyperactive dogs as problematic. They're just happy dogs. That's the way the breed is, so on and so forth. But really, that's not been our experience. When we start looking at the lifestyle, critically examining the lifestyle, including a lot more of rest and repair rather than busy work and adrenalizing activities, just introducing a lot of calming activities, including enabling a good amount of sleep in them. Dogs sleep a lot. That's what the ethogram of a dog says. So enabling sleep, every time there's a little bit of difficult situation that they're in, how do we support or give them options to self-regulate, to return to a state of self-regulation? So that kind of a change in lifestyle can then allow you to witness a kind of a transformation in a dog where their brains start to work, they start to think, you get to see the power of their cognitive ability. Then I don't have to do much. I don't have to say, how do I get this dog to be less reactive? That journey is the dog's journey. How do I deal with my anxiety? That's my journey. Nobody can make me deal with my anxiety. That is entirely my journey. But I need to be in a place where I'm able to process it. And so getting the dog to a place of emotional regulation. And then how do we provide support for these dogs? How do you show up for them? How do you reassure them? How do you help them co-regulate? How do you become partners in regulating their emotions? Getting comfortable with their discomfort, but trying not to modify what they're going through, but saying, hey, I will just sit in this. And again, this is such a difficult thing for us to do. You may be aware, I lost my husband 3 years ago, and I've experienced like this extraordinary amount of grief. He was he meant a lot to me, really. I was madly in love with this person and I relied on him so much. So it was this kind of intense, extraordinary grief. And I also think I think I also had like PTSD there. Uh, and it was interesting, so many friends came in to help me through it, but very few knew what it means to sit with somebody, sit in their discomfort and help co-regulate. Co-regulation it's not about them. They are not the protagonists of the story. They don't come in here and modify everything. They have to give me time and space to do this on my own. But what does it mean to sit there? And that is going to be different. What sitting with me and sitting with my grief is going to be very different from sitting with you and your grief. And as a person supporting me, what they need to really be doing, and chances are I'm not even going to be able to articulate what I need, which means that now this person who's come in to support me has to sit there and think, okay, how do I figure out what this person needs? It's so individual, right? And it's going to change day to day. And how do I be flexible enough? How do I not make this about my success and my victories? How do I figure out what do you need? And I know the times that I have spent time with my dog saying, I can't figure out what do I need to do for you? I can't figure this out. Right? And that is my journey, which is to say, okay, how do I take a breather? How do I put my ego aside? How do I then say, okay, let's take a step back. Maybe I need to ask a friend. Let me present the case here to you. What do you think my dog needs? Sometimes I need to present it to somebody who's not a dog professional, not even a dog person. Sometimes it's a completely fresh look on this, right? Somebody who's never even had dogs and say, this is what is going on. And this person says, it sounds like this to me. And it's a completely different perspective. And I have had to do all of that. And so a lot of people say, oh, but can you operationalize this? Can you give me the steps? No, I can't. I cannot break down. This is at the heart of relationship building and the heart of relationship maintaining, figuring out the reality of the other and trying to support that. And everybody does this their own way. There are no steps to this. And how you and I build a relationship is going to be different from how I build a relationship with another person. It's not even specific to me or you. It's specific to that which exists between you and me. And that is as unique as it can possibly get. I think I've complicated this.
No, it is fascinating. It's fascinating because part of what you were saying is resonates very, resonates with me right now. I lost my mother a year ago and
sorry.
Thank you. And I just literally came back yesterday from closing down the house. Right, because the house is being sold, and the first time that I will not have in 50-something years, my place in Wimbledon with my mother, and something that I loved going back to and visiting her, and but my journey has been very much my journey as well, and I think it can be when you have outside people giving you instruction or giving you help. Sometimes it's, oh yeah, that's great. And other times it's like, that doesn't resonate with me. I don't feel comfortable with that. But as that person as well, being on the other side of it, it's quite disempowering, or it's quite anxiety provoking when you actually don't have all the answers. And I when you just said that about your dog, about like, sometimes I don't know what you need. And I've had my Chihuahua for 14 years. Sometimes, I think I know what she needs most of the time, but sometimes I'm still figuring it out. Yeah. Sometimes I don't know. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I tell people as well, sometimes if you don't have, it's okay not to have control. Where it's okay to admit, and that does make us feel humble. And you have to get rid of the noise that you see on social media and beyond. You have to get rid of that noise. And you can learn from the people that you trust. But it is going to be a very individualized journey. And I also tell people that, what would the dog say? What would your dog say if it could suddenly speak in the language that you understand, right? because we're spending so much time trying to understand dogs, and dogs are trying to understand us. But if that communication was just perfect, and now it can speak in the language that you speak, how would your dog? What would your dog? Would your dog say you're doing a good job? What would they say I need more of?
Mm.
And for example, even if you're thinking of adopting a dog or getting a dog, like how would they interview you? What would you say about yourself?
Yeah.
Like, how would you sell yourself and be honest about that?
Yeah.
And that is really frightening sometimes. And I think that both you and I were sort of, as again, experts. We study a lot of this, but we're supposed to also have all the answers. And we don't. Do we? And that's actually really quite, you have to humble yourself, because there's a lot of experts out there that say, yes, we do have all the answers. But nobody does.
No. We're lucky if we get to all the questions.
Right.
We're not even asking the right questions entirely, let alone the answers.
Right. Yeah. But at least we can put ourselves in a place where we go, okay, where, as you say, we have some humility and go, look, where are we going? What path is the path we're going down, the right kind of path? And so I think it brings me to training. This whole idea of dog training, which really became popularized in the 1920s, even before then, actually, in the late 1800s, when showing your dog at public houses in England became the thing. And then that morphed into dog shows. And then that morphed into, well, you need to have an obedient dog at a dog show. So that morphed into obedience. And then you have Konrad Most and Kohler and all of these people that come in and tell us in the 20s of how we train dogs. And so that whole idea of dog training comes about. And I feel like it's just exploded with so much stuff. Something you just said really resonated with me. It's having that freedom and that time to take a step back. But how do we do that when we put so much onto dogs? Because we got so much in our heads of stuff we need to do. And actually, sleep is what dogs are very good at. I don't really know what I'm trying to ask here, but training seems to be so much the emphasis. When people say, oh, I got a dog and I'm taking it to training classes, or I'm training. How can we move? How can we move beyond that?
Yeah. It's a lot about doing. I think we need to focus a bit more on being rather than just doing, right? We can do things endlessly, and it's just kind of anxiety creating for us and for our dogs. And if we are able to see that and say, okay, something's not working here, what else? And then comes the invitation to say, how do you figure out how to be? And it's a great place to now start looking at, for instance, free living dogs, what you did in Detroit, or people who attend my classes or workshops. I try to take them videos of dogs, because I know that, I can't bring the dogs to you, so I can at least bring videos of them to you, for you to have those moments to say, okay, so left unto themselves, what is it that they're going to do? And that is not as much a question of, okay, that this is why the quantitative studies didn't work for me, right? It's not about they spend X amount of time doing this, Y amount of time doing this. All I can tell you from that is there are some great papers by Dr. Batra's lab on ethograms, and you can go have a look at it, and there are pie charts and graphs on how much time they spend doing different things. But and we know that they sleep a lot. That's a big part of what they do, and we know that they spend a lot of time building and maintaining social relationships. So big part of their life is just hanging out with friends, doing nothing, not actively doing things. So I think familiarizing ourselves with how this looks can then start painting a picture for us on if my dog had complete freedom to just be, what might that look like? And once we have that picture in our mind and we're more comfortable with that picture, which does not necessarily involve, this many walks at this speed at this time, we constantly joke amongst our students. I would imagine like a street dog looking at his watch and saying, it's now time for me to have a pee and have a walk. That's not the way it goes. So picturing a life that looks a little different from that. What does that picture look like? And that's a mental picture you need to build for yourself in your mind, because then you start saying, okay, can I give options to my dog? So for instance, something as simple as sleep. Street dogs don't sleep in a box. Street dogs don't sleep in a den. They're not den animals. Most times, street dogs sleep on elevated surfaces. You will see street dogs on top of cars, even, which is, I think, ridiculously cute. But you will see them on top of a set of stairs. You will see them on different landings. So asking ourselves, if my dog had a choice of where he or she could sleep, not where in the city, but where in my house, where would that be? So giving your dog complete freedom on where and when they sleep. For instance, in our diploma, I asked students to do a sleep study to track, let your dog sleep, and how long do they sleep, where do they sleep, but also what wakes them up. And what wakes them up is a very difficult question to answer, because when you start looking at what wakes them up, 100% of the times, or at least 90% of the times, it's going to be something we do, right? We get up and walk away, the dog gets up. We have our phone rings, the dog gets up. We yell at somebody, the dog gets up. And then I asked them to think about, how would you like it if you were woken up that many times by your partner? Would you still be with him or her? Chances are probably not, right? So, and I think these kind of journeys, embarking on these kind of difficult journeys, for instance, you could do a pee study. Where would your dog choose to, if your dog had a choice on wanting to pee when they want to pee, where would that be? When would that be? And you may not be able to enable that for them all the time, but don't be afraid to ask the question. And don't be afraid to know the answer. Then at least you may get as close as you possibly can. If we were out on a walk and my dog could decide what pace, how long, where, which direction, which dog to meet, who to be friends with, who not to be friends with. If your dog could have a say on it. And when I ask this question, a lot of people kind of have, pat responses. It comes out like that. Like, take a breather. Don't tell me what you think it should be, because that's what's coming out right now. Go try to figure out how to get this response from your dog. How do you give them enough choices to get this response from your dog? And oftentimes the uncomfortable answers come up. Sit with that. Talk to people about it. Talk to like-minded people about it. I think this is what my dog wants, but I'm not able to do it. How do I enable this? And then I think answers start emerging. I think
yes.
I'm answering your
yes,
question.
No, you really have. You really have. I mean, it's almost a relief. We talk a lot about safety. We talk about relief. We talk about taking pressure off. It's almost like you're taking pressure off people. It reminds me of, we know that we're always we're taught to feel shame when we're babies and when we're growing up, and when we're little toddlers, we can walk around naked and there's nobody, that's it just is, right? We're taught to put on clothes because that is, you can't show your body. That's so we're shamed. We're taught to feel guilt, and even from a very young age, that puts pressure on us to conform. We have to conform, and if we don't conform in the right way, then we feel guilty. And so, and then as we grow, there's more pressures to conform. And if you don't conform, then that's a problem. So, what's wrong with this person, this child, and maybe they need therapy so that they can conform. And when we get to the point where if we've got so much in our heads that just having that space and that freedom to say, hey, if your dog is behaving in a way you don't want your dog to behave, and I don't like using that good or bad, if your dog is behaving in that way and you're like, you don't need to feel shame. You don't need to be ashamed. Take pressure off yourself. And let's just go back to asking questions and seeing how can we make the situation more workable, easier, better for both of you. And so relief and safety and understanding and connection and relationships is not about teaching your dog to lie down and stay.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this whole notion about nature versus culture, and this idea that we have been fed that we don't realize we've been fed, which is that we have to overcome our natural instincts in order to evolve as cultural beings and kind of enter this hallowed kingdom of civilization. And we've internalized this so much without realizing that this is not really the sense of being a human being. This is a cultural belief of some cultures. Not all cultures look at it the same way. Not all people through, time or even today live the same way. There are other ways to live that can be equally inspirational. There can be a lot for us to learn from it. The one is not a superior way of living than the other. And if we're willing to acknowledge that and open our minds to, there are other ways of living, we can then start recognizing that this nature versus culture divide is, at the end of the day, a cultural bias. And that is what we have subject ourselves to, and we're trying to subject our dogs to. We are not required to. It is not universally virtuous to subdue our natural instincts. And that is not saying that, okay, let's all get rid of our clothes and, walk around naked. That's not what I'm saying. But be open to asking that question and recognizing, all right, so this is my cultural conditioning. This is not a universal value that is held, by the species or even this earth, or it's not a universal truth. It's just a belief that has come about in a culture or, in a few cultures. And yes, today it's kind of the predominant ideology that bears hegemony over, the brain processes of the thought processes or the ideologies of human beings or in most parts of the world. But that doesn't make it a fact. It's just a belief, often built on religion.
Often.
Right?
Yes.
And so when I point that out is when people have this aha moment. Oh my God, this is not a fact. It's a religious belief. When did this transform from a religious belief to what I have come to believe is a fact? And I think when you're open to asking these, so the workshop that I did in Europe, people had these aha moments, and I was quite convinced that they would stone me out of there and send me away. But I think people, it's very liberating to start asking yourself. It's a form of freedom that you're giving yourself to let go of those expectations and say, let me redefine this for myself. It can be quite powerful.
Sindhoor, where do people find out more about you?
I have a website, www.barcs.com, BHARCS.com. We are also on Facebook. I think the handle is just BHARCS, BHARCS, and on Instagram. On Instagram, we are BHARCS Education, BHARCS_education. And I think we're on YouTube as well. See, I'm not very good at this. But yeah, these are the places. And of course, my book, Dog Knows, it's available on Dogwise in the US. I think that's a great introduction to the kind of ideas that I have. It gives you a kind of a feel for, which direction I'm inviting people to. I want to go, and I'm inviting people to join me.
Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Absolutely fascinating. I knew you'd be amazing, and you are asking such important questions. And it's inspirational. I love this podcast because I do have many guests on here that are just inspiring, right? You want to go away and I want to open my front door and go, yes, I want to just share. Come on. But you're a leading light in our understanding of dogs. And so I would implore everybody listening to this podcast, go check out Sindhoor's, all the amazing things she's doing. And I know there are various seminars and things that are coming up. You can go hear her speak, but there are also numerous videos on YouTube, and you can find out some great information there. And then, of course, your courses, really important to do that, and your mind will be blown. And I hope that it's been blown today. Sindhoor, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, really. Holding space for uncomfortable ideas is not something people do. And the fact that you're doing it, I can't tell you how much it matters to me. So thank you.
I'm always up for some discomfort. I'm telling you that. It's always like, it's my life. It's always like, oh my gosh, recognizing, wait a second, here we go. But I think it does make you a better person. And I think it makes you more curious and able to, have that humility to say, look, this thing needs work. And this, I think that's really important. I think everybody should have that. Well, thanks guys for joining me on this incredible podcast. And I hope that, go love that dog and really observe, and give yourself some time. All right, everybody, take care. And I will see you again on the next podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together, positively.